All right. Glad to be with you guys, and like Mike already said, I'm hoping to come here and work with you all for the foreseeable future. Really excited about this opportunity. You guys, you have no idea. I also wanted to warn you because I'm really excited to get to know all of you guys, and throughout the next couple of months, I might be hunting you down and begging you to come out and get lunch with me or grab a coffee with me or something like that. But I just wanted to express and say that I really look forward to getting to know you guys and getting to spend more time with you and learn more about who you are and where you guys are coming from, and maybe give you a chance to get to know me as well. You can open your Bibles for this morning's lesson to Nehemiah. We'll be in Nehemiah for most of this lesson. And I think I heard from Mike that you guys had studied it somewhat recently, so I'm glad that it's fresh on your guys' minds. So this lesson might be more of a review or a freshening up for you guys, but I hope it'll be helpful and it'll be fruitful for you guys. What I'm hoping to do with you all is nothing super fancy. We're gonna look through about the first 3 chapters or so, and we're gonna look at what I have identified as God's keys to fixing broken things. So if you know anything about Nehemiah, when you think Nehemiah, the thing that probably comes to the top of your head is rebuilding the wall, right? Jerusalem is in shambles. The wall is broken down. It's torn ever since the conquest of Jerusalem, and it has been that way for a long time. And so Nehemiah hears of it, and he goes to help rebuild the wall. What's kind of funny, though, is that only about half the book is really about rebuilding the wall. That's just the first 6 chapters. There's still 7 through 13 that a lot of people don't really remember that well. What I think is cool about Nehemiah is because the chapters 1 through 6 chronicles a story of Nehemiah and the people of Israel rebuilding this wall, right? There's a lot of challenges that come up with rebuilding the wall. Enemies from outside come in, and they're threatening Nehemiah. They're threatening the people to try to put a stop to the work. Problems within Israel. Their own brothers taking advantage of them and extorting them and taking just absurd amounts of money and food away from their brothers, causing a lot of distress, problems. And yet this process of rebuilding the wall, they never quit for a moment. And they put their minds to the work, and they get it done. Remember how long it takes them to finish this wall? 52 days. That's pretty quick. But 1 through 6, rebuilding the wall, is also parallel to 7 through 13 of the people rebuilding their relationship with God. Reorganizing themselves, restructuring Israel to be this people whom God took as his own possession once again. Really, really neat to see it. And all these same principles are echoed throughout rebuilding the wall. It's the same in the people rededicating themselves to God. You hear Nehemiah hears that the wall is broken down. You remember his reaction to that is distressed. He cries out. He fasts for days and he prays to God. That's his reaction in chapter 1. We're going to read about it in a short while. And then in Nehemiah chapter 8, after the wall is finished and we start rededicating ourselves to God, in chapter 8, the law is brought out. And the people realize how far they've gotten from the truth. Their reaction to that is exactly the same as Nehemiah's reaction to hearing that the wall is in shambles. They cry out, they mourn, they fast, and they pray to God in a beautiful prayer in chapter 9. So anyway, I just thought that I would mention those things before we really get into the lesson, try and stir up maybe your curiosity to dive even deeper into Nehemiah in your own studies. But what I really think is valuable about at least these first couple chapters in Nehemiah is that God is really taking our hand and showing us how to fix something that's broken. Where do you start? What's the goal? And you're thinking to yourselves, all right, what broken thing are we fixing? What about our lives? We're all broken to some degree, right? It seems kind of, I don't know, cliche. I'm not sure what the right word is. But we're all broken in some ways, whether it's addiction or bad habits or any number of things. We have brokenness. We live in the world. How do we fix that? And are we going to do it our way or are we going to do it God's way? Nehemiah records for us a story of people who did it God's way. So let's take the principles that were given to these people in rebuilding the wall and follow in their footsteps and see whether we can rebuild our own lives. First principle is something that I think we can learn from Nehemiah. It's found in the first 4 verses of chapter 1. It says, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month Chislev in the 20th year, while I was in Susa, the capital, that Hanani, one of my brothers, and some men from Judah came. And I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and who had survived the captivity, and about Jerusalem. They said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. And the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. The first step that I see from Nehemiah is that he cares. He asks for the welfare of his people back home. That's a proactive step there that's being taken. And when he hears, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, when he hears about the state of the wall, about the state of the people because of that, it's not a passive response. He doesn't just go, oh, well, man, sorry for them. That's too bad. He sat down, he wept, and he mourned for days. He allowed himself to become emotionally troubled. He cared for the welfare of his people, and that drove him to act. That drove him to pray, and later to come before the king in his own court and to ask the leave. So I think the application for us is you got to care. You got to care, right? You got to take personal responsibility of fixing what needs to be fixed. Whether that's the situation right here in the church, something that you know shouldn't be happening, or something that you think should start but hasn't been started by anybody. Are you going to care enough to take personal responsibility of that? To work to try and fix that? I think Nehemiah challenges us there. Next, for the rest of the chapter, Nehemiah prays. Nehemiah says in verse 5, I beseech you, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who preserves the covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear now be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, which I am praying before you now, day and night, on behalf of the sons of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the sons of Israel, which we have sinned against you. I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word which you commanded your servant Moses, saying, If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote part of the heavens, I will gather them from there, and will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant, to the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name, and make your servant successful today. Grant him compassion before this man. Now I was cupbearer to the king. All right. You know, it's kind of hard to read Nehemiah, the book, and not be just impressed with the place of prayer in this book. It just pops up again and again and again. Before every major decision or when they're faced with a major trial, they pray. It just it's just a fluid happening in this book. And in fact, you could look at the entire book of Nehemiah as an answer to the prayer that's prayed right here in chapter 1. It's kind of interesting to see it that way. But if you were to sum up this prayer, how would you do it? I've prayed prayers like this. Nehemiah is saying, God, please give me a second chance. Give us a second chance. He lays out what they're guilty of. He knows that they're guilty. Makes reference back to the past promises that God made about how he would deal with them if they were unfaithful to him. They were unfaithful to him, so they're in captivity. And Nehemiah trusts in God's promise about the future. In verse 9, if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most parts of the heavens, I will gather them from there and will bring them to the place where I have chosen my name to dwell. He knows that God is faithful, that he will bring about his promises if they remain faithful. So I think for us, we need to learn to pray like this. When it comes to confession, we're very even privately, we don't really want to bring it all out to God. We don't want to say everything that we did wrong to God. And God knows what I did wrong. I won't say that. Nehemiah does not mince any words about the wrong that they did. He knows it. He emphasizes it. God, you gave us commandments, and we didn't keep them. Everything that you went through to give your people rules for how to live, everything that you did for us, we squandered. And that's why he begs, God, please, hear this prayer. Just hear it. Prayer is also a show of priorities. How badly do you want to fix something if you are not praying about it? How much do you trust in God's ability to help you overcome the brokenness in your life if you do not pray to him about it. If you do not beg his help to hear you. Other mentions of prayer that Nehemiah does is in chapter 2, verse 4, when he asks the king, this bold action of Nehemiah could get him killed. Asked the king to leave for Israel with wood and other materials. In verse 4, the king said to me, "What would you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. In the middle of this conversation, stressful moment, so I prayed to the God of heaven. Knee-jerk reaction there. I think we need to learn to pray like Nehemiah. I know I've already said that, but it's worth emphasizing. You got to care, and you got to pray. And then Nehemiah takes action. Chapter 2, verse 1. Came about in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies desolate and its gates have been consumed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What would you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. I said to the king, "If it please the king, if your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, "If it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house to which I will go." The king granted them to me because the good hand of my God was on me. Nehemiah made a plan, and he stuck with it. And it was immediate action, wasn't it? He considered it, he prayed about it, and then he did it. And what a plan this was. Nehemiah might have been thinking about, there are a lot of intimidating factors about this plan, isn't there? I mean, just try to engage your imagination for a moment. Wine is going before the king, so probably while he's eating or something like that. King sitting in his great dining hall with his queen beside him, and little Nehemiah walks up to the table to give him the wine, and his face is sad. He's never done this before. He's never come before the king like this. King turns his attention to Nehemiah. And this is the make or break moment. So Nehemiah tells him the situation, what's going on, what he needs, what he wants. And the plan works. Wow. Lucky, right? The plan works. Verse 8. The very end. The king granted them to me because the good hand of my God was on me. Because the good hand of my God was on me. Nothing special about the way Nehemiah did this. It was by the grace of God. that he was granted this. Commit your plans to the Lord. So I want to mention one thing that maybe you haven't thought about before in connection to Nehemiah. How many prophets are in Nehemiah? In my reading, I haven't found any. How many visions are mentioned in Nehemiah? I haven't found any. What gives Nehemiah the idea to go to Jerusalem and to rebuild this wall? Why is it his business to do any of that? Ever think about that? Saul and David, those kings, God chose them. He sent prophets to them. Moses got the burning bush. Nehemiah? Nehemiah simply asked for the welfare of his brothers. Nehemiah simply saw a need. He saw an opportunity to help. And then he used the abilities and the resources that God had blessed him with to fill that need. He took personal responsibility of something that nobody would hold him to. Nobody would say, Nehemiah, that's your responsibility. Yet he took it on himself. I think we need to be impressed with that. I mean, we got to be. Come on. When God blesses us with the opportunities, the abilities, and the resources, why would we not use them? When he gives us opportunities in the kingdom, and we are in positions to help out, why would we not? I think we got to think about that, because there are reasons that Nehemiah should not have gone and helped Jerusalem. I mean, you think about it later on in the book, we're talking chapter 4, chapter 5, or chapter 4 and chapter 6. They had enemies. There was real threats. Tobiah, Sanballat, Geshem, several death threats made to Nehemiah, to the people of Israel. They had to work with a sword in one hand and a tool in the other. They couldn't even take their swords off to go down to the water. There were reasons for them not to take this opportunity to work. Yet Nehemiah did it anyway. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think God has blessed a whole lot of Christians with the position of Nehemiah as far as abilities and resources goes. I think a lot of Christians do not take on Nehemiah responsibilities. Back home, I was blessed for a short time to be able to work in the prison in Newcastle, Indiana, studying with the guys there. And they could teach us a thing or two. A lot of those guys couldn't read. Almost none of them had any family members that wanted good for them. I would wager that none of them had meaningful friends and connections outside that would actually try to help them. People in Africa, a lot of them can't read. Sierra Leone, West Africa, been ravaged by a civil war for the past decade or so. recently stopped. No education, can't read. The language they speak is not a written language. If you can read, and if you got a Bible, you've already been blessed with so much ability. Do we realize the good that we can do with that? I think it's worth thinking about. That's something that I see right here in Nehemiah that we need to learn from.
Amen.
All right. One more point. I just want to talk about the disappointing end of Nehemiah. And I'm talking about chapter 13. It ends kind of weird, doesn't it? This is, I kind of say it a lot of the time as a joke, but Nehemiah pulling hair, right? Whenever you're trying to help a brother get through something, or Nehemiah pulling hair, but this is a story to where Nehemiah is so frustrated because the people of Israel refuse to stay separate from these foreign nations, and it's just driving Nehemiah insane. And he's punishing these people for just failing to be the holy people that God wanted them to be. And so it ends with we can just read the story in Nehemiah 13:23. In those days I also saw that the Jews had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. As for their children, half spoke in the language of Ashdod, and none of them was able to speak in the language of Judah, but the language of his own people. So I contended with them and cursed them and struck them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God that you shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin regarding these things? Yet among the many nations there was no king like him. And he was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, the foreign women caused even him to sin. And he continues, and it continues to the end. This is a really anticlimactic end, because throughout Nehemiah we're making reforms, right? Rededicating ourselves to God and reading the law, rediscovering the feasts. And it ends this way. Why? Why would it end this way? I think this is a really fitting end for Nehemiah. I'm not pulling your leg. I think this is for a purpose. Zechariah chapter 2. We are given a glimpse as to what a return from exile to Jerusalem would look like. And in verse 4, he said, "Run, speak to that young man, saying, Jerusalem will be inhabited without walls because of the multitude of men and cattle within it. For I, declares the Lord, will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be the glory in her midst." There's this picture being painted of Jerusalem in Zechariah, and exiles returning to it. And it would seem like it's the return from Babylonian captivity. And yet, the picture that we just got in Nehemiah doesn't really line up to the hopeful aspirations of the prophets here. Why is that? I think God is teaching his people that the true return from captivity to true Jerusalem is not going to be this one. It's going to be the one that's happening right now. this Jerusalem. And I find it funny that in that passage in Zechariah, this new Jerusalem will have no need of walls. Not like Nehemiah, who spent so hard working for those walls. God will be its walls. If you're willing, you can come and be a part of this new Jerusalem. The kingdom that has been prophesied of and awaited and alluded to in so many different ways. If you want to begin fixing a broken life, do it according to the rules of somebody who's done it before. God. He's fixed a lot of broken things over the years. And He can help you. And if we can help you in any way, then please come forward as we stand and sing the invitation song.